break from routine. And on this October day in 1967, market towns throughout Britain were thronged with people, as they have been for hundreds of years. No one knew that this would be the last market day for months to come. That a shadow had fallen on the land, the shadow of foot and mouth disease. It struck first in the county of Shropshire, when, on October the 25th, foot and mouth disease was confirmed in pigs on a mixed farm 5 miles from the market town of Oswestry. Immediately, military veterinary officers set up a control centre in the town police station, and infected area restrictions were placed on a 10-mile area. Animals from the infected farm had been sent to Oswestry Market on that same day, and because of this, over 3,000 animals were impounded. Early signs were a reluctance to move, a staring coat, and a tucked-up appearance. The cattle walked stiffly on tender feet, and a periodic flick of the foot showed the pain suffered. Salivation was perhaps an even more obvious sign, and the characteristic drooling saliva, combined with champing jaws or smacking lips, became an all too familiar sight. Sheep, in greater numbers and with less clearly defined symptoms, made examination a more difficult problem. The flock must be gathered together for careful scrutiny, and any lameness or reluctance to move is suspect. Such animals are given a detailed examination. The main clinical symptom in sheep is lameness, which appears usually on more than one foot. The inspection and examination of pigs presented its own particular problems. Any apparent lameness when the animal was moved was treated with suspicion and made a thorough examination necessary. The first step was to drive the animals out of the soft mud and onto a firm surface where better inspection was possible. Men, materials and machinery have arrived, and the selected site is being prepared for the disposal of the carcasses. The method of disposal depends on a number of factors, and while burial is preferable for reasons of economy and speed, the choice can only be made after examining the land and consulting with the local water authority. Burial pits require comparatively few men and machines, but when it's necessary to burn carcasses, a great deal of fuel is required, and the many vehicles often have to travel long distances over rough ground to reach the cremation site. As time passed, an incendiary chemical was brought into use, which considerably helped the burning process. Each infected farm brought its own particular problem, to be solved by the control centre, already hard-pressed to maintain the ever-mounting demand for men and equipment. As the second week drew to a close, over 100 new cases had been confirmed, and despite untiring efforts to stamp out the disease, it continued to spread, leaping swiftly northeastward towards some of the most heavily stocked dairy country in the world. The armed forces offered help in the cleansing and disinfection operations, and soon hundreds of troops joined the battle alongside ministry staff and contractors' men. NFU liaison officers and the personnel of many voluntary organizations gave their wholehearted support. Over hundreds of square miles, the picture was the same. In field after field, the grim piles of carcasses lay sprawled. Heavy machines tore at the earth, preparing the burial pits, and streams of material for the funeral pyres poured in. Fields glowed red with flames. Infected area or controlled area restrictions were now in force for the whole of the country, and the police carried out the mammoth task of dealing with the thousands of requests for movement licenses. In the infected areas, police officers were stationed at the foot and mouth control centres so that the maximum cooperation could be achieved and queries dealt with quickly. Stages of the disease are discovered. Selected examples from dead animals demonstrate the effect of foot and mouth disease on the different species. In this cow, a ruptured vesicle or blister is evident on the upper surface of the muzzle. An unruptured vesicle can be seen on the dental pad and another on the outside surface on the bottom lip. The underside of the tongue shows a ruptured vesicle at the tip. The whole of the surface epithelium of the tongue is blanched and comprises an extensive vesicle. Pinching of the epithelium and using pressure to break the toughened membrane ruptures the vesicle and the highly infectious contents are released. On this foot, blanching of the epithelium between the clays is obvious, and the vesicles have extended along the anterior part of the coronary band. These vesicles have ruptured and the infectious fluid has escaped. In dairy cattle, vesicles on the teats are sometimes seen. They are easily ruptured owing to the thinness of the skin in this area. Mouth lesions in sheep are not always present, but when they do occur, they are most likely to be found on the dental pad. Foot lesions are far more common, but diagnosis may be complicated by conditions of foot rot. In these examples, rupture of large vesicles has occurred in the skin between the clays. This and the coronary band are the most common sites for lesions in sheep. Tongue lesions in pigs are comparatively rare, and when seen, tend to show only a very shallow break in the epithelium. Foot lesions are common, and unruptured vesicles are easily seen involving the coronary band. When the vesicles rupture, it may lead to the whole of the hoof being shed. In the live animal, of course, this type of lesion will cause acute lameness. All over the infected areas, the notices began to come down, and the whole of Britain waited, until finally, 8 months from the day of the initial outbreak, this most serious epidemic of all time was declared officially at an end. Altogether, 18 counties were involved, and Cheshire and Shropshire were the two most heavily affected. The virus had shown itself to be capable of rapid spread, but the combination of early reporting and the standard control measures had successfully kept the disease confined. Of the 2,364 outbreaks, 94% were dealt with in Cheshire, Shropshire, and 4 adjoining counties. A total of 434,000 animals were slaughtered, and £26.5 million was paid in compensation. Labour, materials and equipment used in the control operation cost a further £4 million.
threatening to block the government's mass slaughter of healthy animals. Some are resigned to it, but others are threatening a rural revolt. Good evening. There's growing opposition in the parts of the country worst affected by foot and mouth disease to the new government plans for mass slaughter of healthy animals. The Farmers' Union nationally continues to say it's distressing but necessary. Some farmers, though, are saying they'll stop any attempt to kill their animals if they show no signs of the disease. There are now 273 confirmed cases in the UK. 17 new cases today, including 4 in Wales, 2 in Durham and 2 in Scotland. Our environment correspondent Richard Bilton reports.
The fight against foot and mouth is clearing British fields. The suggestion of a risk is now enough for mass slaughter to be the answer. That means these Cumbrian lambs, only hours old, will not live much longer. The policy is any animal within 2 miles of a confirmed case will be killed. Many farmers say that is something they will not accept.
They can have all the rights in the world, but they'll not get through this gate. Definitely not.
What would you do?
I'm thinking about it. But I'm not alone. All my neighbours have the same opinion.
The pyres are already being built, a clear sign of the destruction to come. Police have revealed that they today have taken firearms from a farmer who allegedly threatened officials who came to kill his animals.
This has had a devastating effect on the people and the farming community in the county, quite understandably so. But when it comes to making threats, and particularly where firearms are involved, we need to respond to that.
There is now talk of rural revolt. Only a small demonstration today at Abbey Town in northern Cumbria, but feelings were clear.
I just want to fight for what's right. Mr. Brown's trying to do his job, but I'm trying to do mine.
We're doing everything we can to keep the infection off our farm. Still going to lose them.
That are free of disease. We're culling animals that are at risk and may be harbouring the disease. If there was some way of telling which ones were which, of course we would use it, but there isn't.
The scale of what is planned has frightened farmers across the country. Ian Griffith has already had 2 culls on his Northamptonshire farm. The last time was because of suspicious contact. The animals actually tested clear. He says it is hard for farmers to accept.
When that actual phone call comes, like they said, Ian, I think you better sit down because I've got some bad news for you. I'll tell you something, when they tell you that, you want to bloody fall down, not just sit down.
Many farmers now feel that it is politics and not science that is leading the fight against this disease. There was support for the animal movement ban, but that is being replaced in many areas by anger, that this mass slaughter is too heavy-handed and too many people are suffering. Richard Bilton, BBC News, Northamptonshire.
Oh, Kevin Bouquet is in Longtown, that's right in the centre of the outbreak in Cumbria, and Andrew Castle is at the disease control headquarters in Dumfries. Kevin, there's obviously a lot of farmers who are upset and angry, but what can they actually do to stop the ministry men coming onto their farms?
Well, there's been a lot of talk of that today, talk of people padlocking their gates, preventing the ministry men from getting anywhere near their herds and their flocks of sheep. It's a bit of a non-starter. The ministry have a right to go onto whatever farmland they wish, and the police have made it clear tonight in Cumbria that they will help the ministry to enforce that. So there is really no prospect of the ministry being banned from farms.
So they can't actually physically stop the ministry men coming on their farms. So what are they going to do?
Well, a couple of things. One thing that all farmers are saying here that they'd like to see is a greater enforcement of the restrictions once an infection has been discovered. They say that up to now, when infections have been discovered, it's taking several days to deal with it, to slaughter herds, to dispose of the bodies. They want to see that work carried out more quickly and see if that might have some effect on preventing this or slowing this outbreak down without having to murder, without having to... without having to murder, without having to slaughter healthy animals. One other thing is to try to persuade the government, and they'll be doing that next week when they talk to Jim Scudamore when he comes to Cumbria.
Andy Castle in Dumfries, are feelings running as high there?
Well, certainly there's a lot of despair and indeed frustration, Michael, that we're still in the grip of this foot and mouth disease. I think amongst the farmers I talk to around about Dumfries and Galloway, there's a reluctant acceptance that the cull of healthy animals has to go ahead, much though they detest the idea. I think a lot of the farms around this area are quite big concerns. They're also mixed farms, which means they have not just sheep, but also large amounts of cattle and pigs on their farms, and I think the feeling is that if by destroying healthy sheep they can somehow get ahead of this disease and save their cattle, then at least they might be able to salvage something from this dreadful mess, which I think is why they feel rather more acceptance of it than perhaps they do south of the border there in Cumbria. But of course it's not an option that's available to a hill farmer in Cumbria who solely relies on sheep for a living.
Andy, Kevin, thanks very much.
These cows were slaughtered on Monday. It wasn't until today that they were removed. It all adds to the frustration, the anger, the anguish of the farming community. Today, the government promised to speed things up, though for some it's already too little, too late.
The worst experience of my life. People say it's like a bereavement, and it is. You really, even now, although I know it's happened, I still cannot quite believe it.
And the latest cull of disease-free animals judged to be at risk has heightened passion still further. Measures to control foot and mouth have become increasingly severe. The first case was diagnosed on February the 19th. 4 days later, restrictions were placed on animal movement and markets were closed. And the following day, the mass slaughter began. But after 2 weeks, the incubation period of the virus, the number of cases continued to rise. So yesterday came the decision to kill animals in Cumbria and Dumfries within 2 miles of infected farms. The French took more drastic action from the outset, slaughtering sheep known to have come from the UK. So far, they've escaped with just 1 case. So could more have been done here?
Well, this whole thing has been due to the movement and mixing of sheep up and down the country. And as
senior vets believe the government's approach has been the right one, but tracking the disease and stamping it out is proving more difficult than many imagined.
There is, in fact, a shortage of vets at the moment because once a vet has gone on to an infected premises, effectively that vet cannot visit another premises for at least a week after he or she has left the premises. There is also, I understand, a shortage of materials. One requires vast quantities of materials to burn even 1 cow, and these are not always readily available.
Some of those involved in the last major outbreak are being brought back into service to help out, including the vet who diagnosed the first case in 1967. This week, Hayden Christie diagnosed the first case in Cheshire. He believes the government has got it about right, but says it's vital the whole process is speeded up.
The time from diagnosis to slaughter should be radically speeded up. That is my feeling, and you can't afford to have animals with the disease still alive for 2 to 3, 4 days after the diagnosis has been made.
Here at the Ministry, no one's predicting the end of this epidemic. It's already spread wider and lasted longer than many had thought likely. The war against this disease is by no means won. Neil Dixon, BBC News, at the Ministry of Agriculture.
Imports of meat into the UK are calculated to have risen tenfold since the foot and mouth outbreak. This plant in Sussex has doubled the number of consignments brought in from elsewhere in Europe. Today, as every day, meat hygiene inspectors are checking to ensure these German carcasses contain no spinal cord. Under EU-wide measures to control BSE, it must have been removed immediately after slaughter to protect public health. But in too many cases, this hasn't been happening. There have been breaches most frequently in meat from Germany, forcing the European Commission to close down slaughterhouses. Bits of spinal cord have also been found in beef from the Netherlands, from the Irish Republic and Spain.
The fact we found some spinal cord and identified it shows that the inspection system is working. My concerns would be where items are coming in not on the carcass or in box format or inspections aren't taking place, that something could slip through.
Environmental health and trading standards officers have all been ordered to be more vigilant than ever, but policing foot and mouth means the system's under strain.
The checks people probably imagine are being done simply are not being done. I think if people realise quite how fragile the system was and how little safeguard there is on the edge, there would be a lot more quite serious concern than there is at the moment.
In this plant, every single imported carcass is thoroughly inspected, not just for BSE risk material, but also for any other sign of contamination or disease. The question is, are meat imports elsewhere in the food chain so thoroughly checked? Nicola Coslaw, BBC News, Sussex.